Ladies and gentlemen, you can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking backward. It's one of the most important lessons I've learned. When you're in the middle of something uncertain, when you're standing at a crossroads with no map, no clear direction, it's incredibly hard to see how it will all work out. But somehow, with time and perspective, the pieces begin to fit. What once felt like chaos starts to form a pattern. When I look back on the defining moments of my life, I realize how disconnected they seemed at the time. Some of them felt random, even like mistakes. And yet, without them, the big picture, the story that makes sense now, wouldn't exist. That's the funny thing about life. It rarely announces what matters while it's happening. Only when you look over your shoulder does the pattern emerge. There was a time I felt completely lost. I had walked away from something that most people would have held onto tightly. It didn't make much sense from the outside, but inside, I knew it wasn't right anymore. I didn't have a backup plan. There wasn't a clear next step, but something inside told me to trust it. So I did. That trust didn't come from logic. It came from intuition, from a quiet voice that said, "This matters. Keep going." We live in a world that constantly pushes for guarantees. Parents, schools, even our own minds want to map out life like a straight highway. But life isn't linear. It's messy, unpredictable, and beautiful. Sometimes you'll take a class, meet someone, read a book, or explore something just because you're curious. And that moment will echo years later in a way you never expected. You won't know at the time that it was the start of something meaningful. You won't know it was a dot, but it was. The mistake many people make is trying to figure everything out in advance. They want to see how all the dots will connect before they take the first step, but that's not how it works. The only way to live fully is to trust that the path will unfold, not always the way you want, but the way you need. That takes courage. It takes faith, and yes, it takes a little bit of foolishness. Looking back now, it's easy to romanticize those early decisions. But at the time, there was nothing glamorous about uncertainty. It was uncomfortable. It was scary. There were moments of doubt, moments of wondering if I'd made a mistake. But deep down, I kept moving forward because something told me those steps mattered, even if I didn't know why yet. What I want to tell you is this. Don't waste your time waiting for all the answers. They won't come. Take the step that feels right, even if it's unconventional. Say yes to something that excites you, even if it's not practical. Walk away from what no longer feels like your path, even if everyone else says to stay. The dots are never visible in real time. They only become clear in retrospect. And when you hit that point where you look back, when you realize that the scattered choices, the setbacks, the risks, and the passions you chased are all part of a single story, you'll understand what I mean. You'll see that every step, every wrong turn, every spark of inspiration was leading you somewhere meaningful. You'll realize it was never random. It was always taking you exactly where you needed to go. So if you're in the middle of uncertainty, if you're walking through a season of not knowing, hold on to this truth. You don't need to see the whole path. You just need to trust the next step. Keep going. Follow the pull, trust the process. Someday you'll look back, and it'll all make sense when you're young, or even when you're not so young. There's this pressure to have everything figured out. People will ask you what you're going to do with your life, what career you're pursuing, what your 5-year plan looks like. And if you don't have a perfect answer, it can feel like you're already behind. But the truth is, the most important decisions I ever made didn't come from following a career path. They came from following my curiosity. Curiosity is underrated. We're taught to focus on goals, on structure, on building something stable. And while there's value in that, there's something even more powerful in simply being drawn to what excites you, what fascinates you, especially when it doesn't seem to lead anywhere obvious. There was a time when I wandered into a class that had nothing to do with my so-called future. No requirements, no credits pushing me there. I just liked the idea of it. It was interesting, beautiful even. At the time, I had no clue how it would ever matter, but it did, in ways I couldn't imagine. That's the magic of curiosity. It pulls you into places that don't always make sense in the moment. It doesn't announce its purpose. It just whispers, "This feels right. Try it." the world will tell you to ignore that voice. It'll say, be practical, stick to the plan, don't waste time. But I've found that some of the most practical things in life don't look practical at all when you first step into them. They look like distractions. They look like risks. They look like detours. And yet, they're the very things that make you who you are. Following your curiosity means letting go of needing to control every outcome. It means being willing to explore without guarantees. And that can be scary, especially when the people around you are checking off boxes, chasing titles, getting promotions. You start to wonder if you're doing something wrong. But if you feel pulled towards something, if there's a spark, even a tiny one, you owe it to yourself to listen. We're not machines, and life isn't a formula. You can't just plug in steps and expect a meaningful result. Meaning comes from what moves you, and the only way to find what moves you is to explore, to try things, to go down paths that don't promise immediate payoff. That's how you find your voice. That's how you build something that's truly yours, not something that was handed to you or expected of you. Some people fall into a job or a role and it works out fine. But if you want to do something extraordinary, something that matters deeply to you, you have to begin with what fascinates you, what makes you lose track of time, what keeps you up at night in the best way. And sometimes that doesn't look like a career. Sometimes it's a hobby, a conversation, a weird book, a moment that sticks with you, and you don't always need to justify it. You just need to follow it. You might not see the connection right away. You might not be able to explain it to anyone. That's okay. The path doesn't have to be clear to anyone else. It just has to be honest. Because what you're doing in those moments, when you're following your curiosity, is building the foundation of something bigger than a resume. You're building depth. You're building insight. You're building you. So don't be afraid to wander a little. Don't be afraid to learn something just because it's beautiful or strange or thrilling. Don't be afraid to let go of what you're supposed to do and lean into what actually moves you. Because one day, when you look back, those curiosities will be the things that shaped your story, not the plans, not the titles, the wonder, the exploration, the moments when you said yes to something just because you wanted to know more. The people who change the world aren't the ones who followed a straight path. They're the ones who trusted their own questions more than anyone else's answers. And if you're willing to do that, if you're willing to chase the things that spark your soul, there's no telling where that energy might lead you. Sometimes life punches you in the gut. Everything you've built, everything you thought was secure, suddenly slips through your fingers. It could be a job, a relationship, a dream you've invested years into. And when that moment hits, when it all seems to fall apart, it's hard not to feel like you've failed. But the truth is, what feels like the end can actually be the beginning of something far more powerful. When I went through one of the biggest failures of my life, it wasn't just painful. It was deeply personal. It shook my identity. I had wrapped so much of who I was into what I was doing that when it was taken away, I didn't know who I was anymore. I felt embarrassed. I felt rejected. And honestly, I didn't know what to do next. But in that space, after the dust settled, after the shock wore off, something surprising started to happen. I began to feel free. See, when you hit rock bottom, you stop worrying so much about playing it safe. You stop being so concerned with what others expect of you. You stop trying to prove anything, because suddenly you have nothing to lose. And when you have nothing to lose, you can start being honest. You can start building not for anyone else, but for yourself. That's what I did. I got back to doing the kind of work that made me fall in love with creating in the first place. Not because it was part of some big plan, and not because I knew where it would lead, but simply because I loved it. That's the thing about failure. It strips away the noise. It brings you face with yourself. And if you can sit with that discomfort, if you can stay open instead of shutting down, you might just rediscover the part of you that got buried under success, pressure, and expectations. We tend to think of success and failure as opposites. But they're not. They're partners in the same journey. You don't get to have one without the other. And sometimes failure is the only thing that can push you far enough out of your comfort zone to discover what you're really made of. It's the clearing of the canvas before you paint something new. When things fell apart for me, I had to face questions I'd never asked before. What do I really care about? What kind of work makes me feel alive? If I never had to prove anything to anyone again, what would I spend my time doing? Those aren't easy questions, but they're essential, and I might never have asked them if I had stayed on the path that looked like success. Looking back, that so-called failure became one of the best things that ever happened to me. It forced me to reevaluate everything. It opened up space for new ideas, new relationships, and new ways of thinking. It taught me resilience, not just in the external sense, but internally. Resilience of identity, of purpose, of spirit. There's this strange paradox in life. The moments you think are breaking you are often the ones building you. You can't see it right away. In the moment, it just feels like pain. But if you stay with it, if you don't let the pain define you or the loss limit you, something new begins to emerge, something real. Something rooted not in ego, but in passion. You'll find that there's a different kind of power that comes from starting over. Not the kind that needs applause or validation, but the quiet strength of knowing that you're doing what you love for no other reason than that it matters to you. That's when your work becomes pure. That's when your path begins to shift, to open up in unexpected ways, not because you forced it, but because you trusted it. So when you hit a wall, when something you counted on disappears, don't rush to fill the void. Don't scramble for the next thing just to feel secure again. Sit in it. Ask the hard questions. Let it refine you. What looks like a dead end might just be a doorway. What feels like a breakdown might be the beginning of your greatest breakthrough. There's this pressure to always know what you're doing, to have a plan, to map out every step before you take it. But that's not how life actually works. Most of the time, you don't get a blueprint. You get instincts, you get hunches, you get these little nudges that say, go that way. And the courage to follow them is often what makes all the difference. When I was younger, I didn't always know where things were heading. Actually, I almost never knew. I wasn't guided by some master strategy or 5-year vision. What I did have was a sense of what felt meaningful, what pulled my energy, what excited me, even when I couldn't explain why. And so I followed that, not because I had it all figured out, but because I didn't. That kind of decision-making scares people. It doesn't look logical from the outside. People want proof. They want a guarantee. They want to know that if they take this step, it will lead to that outcome. But life doesn't give you that kind of certainty. What it gives you are moments. Moments where you feel something stir, even if you don't know where it will lead. And if you ignore those moments long enough, they get quieter. But if you follow them, they start to connect. It's easy to look back and draw a straight line through all the things that worked out. But at the time, that line looked like chaos. It looked like uncertainty. It looked like walking forward into the dark. And yet, that's how all the best things in my life began. Not with a plan, but with a step. People talk a lot about having passion, as if it's this big, dramatic flame that's always burning. But passion doesn't always show up with fireworks. Sometimes it's just a whisper that says, keep going. And you have to trust that whisper, especially when nothing around you makes sense yet. I've made a lot of choices that at the time seemed risky or strange. I left things behind that looked good on paper because deep down I knew they weren't right for me. I took chances on ideas that had no safety net, and not every risk paid off immediately. Some took years. Some never did, but what I gained from taking those steps was momentum. Even when I didn't know exactly where I was heading, I was still in motion. I was still learning, growing, becoming. There's a kind of clarity that comes from doing, not from thinking. You don't figure things out by sitting still. You figure them out by moving forward. Even if the step is small, even if you trip, movement creates clarity. Experience shapes direction. But only if you're willing to act before you have all the answers. Some people wait their whole lives for the perfect moment to begin. They want every variable controlled, every outcome predicted. But perfection is just procrastination in disguise. The truth is, the perfect moment never comes. What does come are windows, small windows of opportunity where you feel something click, even if you can't explain it. And if you hesitate too long, the window closes. But if you move, if you take the step, you invite momentum into your life. And momentum is powerful. It opens new doors. It reveals new paths. It attracts new people. I've seen people with all the talent in the world stall out because they were waiting to be sure. And I've seen people with far less certainty go far, simply because they kept going. The difference isn't intelligence, it's motion, forward motion, even when the destination isn't clear, especially when the destination isn't clear. So if you're standing in a place of not knowing right now, if you're unsure, if you're scared, if you're feeling stuck, I want you to know that's okay. You don't need to see the whole road. You don't need to have it all figured out. You just need to move one step, one call, one action. That's how you find the next piece. That's how the fog begins to lift. That's how you start to connect what you can't yet see. Waiting for certainty will only keep you stuck. But trusting your instincts, acting on what feels true, even when it's small, that's how you create momentum. That's how you build a life that's not just impressive from the outside, but deeply meaningful from the inside. There's a moment that comes, not when you're in the middle of the chaos, not when you're chasing the next thing, but later, sometimes years later. It happens when you pause, look back, and begin to realize that all the disconnected pieces of your life weren't random after all. They were forming something, not a straight line, not a perfect plan, but a pattern, a story, a path. When I reflect on my own journey, it's strange how things that once felt insignificant, or even like mistake, ended up being turning points. At the time, they didn't seem special, a random decision. A spontaneous choice, a failure that stung. None of it felt like part of some grand design, but looking back, I can see how those moments shaped everything that came after. They weren't detours, they were dots. The hard part is, when you're in the middle of it, you rarely see any of that. You just feel lost. You feel like you're drifting or falling behind. You question your decisions. You second guess your instincts. But then later, something happens. Maybe you discover a new opportunity that uses a skill you picked up years ago. Or you find yourself in a situation that draws on an experience you didn't think mattered. And suddenly it clicks. The dots begin to connect. What I've learned is that everything we experience has the potential to serve us later, if we stay open to it. Every job, every class, every person we meet, even every failure, plants something inside us. And it's not always clear what that something is, but over time those pieces start to build on each other, the skills add up, the lessons deepen, the pain teaches resilience, the curiosity sparks ideas. And when you least expect it, the picture starts to emerge. It's like being inside a puzzle without the box. You're handed one piece at a time and told to figure it out. You don't know what the final image is supposed to look like. You don't know where the edges are. You're just putting pieces down, one by one, hoping they'll fit. And for a while, it feels like they don't. But eventually, you begin to see something forming. You realize that what once looked like a random fragment actually fits perfectly into the whole. That's the beauty of time and perspective. The more distance you get from the moment, the more clearly you can see its place in the bigger picture. But the key is, you have to keep going. You have to keep collecting those pieces. You have to live through the uncertainty, through the mess, through the parts where nothing seems to make sense, because only then will you have the pieces to look back on later. There's something incredibly powerful about that realization, that nothing was wasted. Even the moments you'd rather forget, even the risks that didn't work out, even the jobs you hated or the dreams that didn't come true, all of it shaped you, all of it added depth, all of it led you here. And once you've seen that pattern once, it becomes easier to trust the next uncertain step. You begin to believe, not just with your head, but with your gut, that this too is part of something. That this decision, or this challenge, or this unexpected turn will one day fit into your story in a way you can't see yet. That's where the real confidence comes from, not from knowing what's next, but from trusting that it will make sense someday. We spend so much time trying to figure out the meaning in the moment. We want immediate answers, but the truth is, meaning often comes later. It doesn't announce itself when you're in it. It reveals itself when you look back. And when it does, it changes how you see everything that came before. So if you're in a place where things feel scattered or disconnected, I want you to know, that's normal, that's part of it. you're not lost. You're collecting dots. And one day, when you least expect it, they'll connect in a way that shows you the beauty of the path you've been on all along. When you finally start to see how the dots connect, when the pieces of your life begin forming something meaningful, you're faced with an even more important question. What do you do with it? What do you do with everything you've been through, everything you've learned, everything you've built? And for me, the answer has always been the same. You create from it. There's something deeply human about the urge to create. It's not just about starting companies or designing products. It's about making something that didn't exist before, something that reflects who you are, what you believe in, and how you see the world. It's not about perfection. It's about honesty. It's about building from the inside out. When you create from your own experiences, when you bring together the dots you've lived, the lessons you've learned, and the risks you've taken, you're not just producing something for others to consume. You're offering a piece of yourself. You're saying, this is what I see. This is what matters to me. This is how I choose to shape the world. And the thing is, you don't have to wait for permission to do that. You don't need approval. You don't need a title or a certain level of experience. What you need is a sense of urgency, a sense that your time is limited, and that what you make with that time is your responsibility. Because it is. No one else can do it for you. No one else can bring your particular vision to life. No one else has lived your story in quite the same way. That's your power. People spend so much time chasing external validation. They wait for someone to tell them it's their turn, that they're ready, that they've earned it. But if you wait too long, you miss the moment. The world doesn't need more people doing what they think they're supposed to do. It needs more people doing what they're here to do. People who are willing to step forward even when it's uncomfortable, especially when it's uncomfortable. Creation is rarely convenient. It asks for sacrifice. It demands focus. It tests your patience, and there are moments, many moments, when it would be easier to walk away, to settle, to do something safer. But deep down, you know that's not why you're here. You didn't come this far to play small. You didn't collect all these dots just to keep them to yourself. You came here to contribute, to express, to shape something that might inspire someone else to do the same. And the funny thing is, when you do that, when you create something that's real, it resonates. Maybe not with everyone, but with someone, and that's enough. Because when something is born from truth, it carries a different kind of weight. It cuts through the noise. It reaches people. It matters. It's easy to get caught up in outcomes, to think about how big something will be, how much recognition it will get, how successful it will become. But the most important work I've ever done didn't come from chasing those things. It came from following what felt true. It came from putting the work first and letting everything else follow. And that's when things started to move. That's when momentum built. That's when impact happened. You don't have to start with something massive. You just have to start. A small idea, a quiet moment of clarity, a question that won't leave you alone. That's enough. That's the seed, and once you plant it, once you begin, you'll be surprised at how everything you've lived through, every dot you've collected, suddenly becomes useful, relevant, necessary. So don't underestimate the value of your own journey. Don't dismiss your instincts or downplay your voice. And above all, don't wait for the world to give you a sign. You already have everything you need to begin. You have your dots. You have your story. And you have a choice to use it or to let it fade. Make something, build something, say something, leave something behind that carries the truth of who you are. Because at the end of the day, what you create will be the most honest reflection of the life you chose to live.